thought I'd do a video that was a little bit more personal about my own process of moving away from conservative thinking to what I am today and how I became the founder of Build the Matriarchy. Hi, I'm Katie McDonald. If you haven't ever seen any of my videos, I am, in fact, the founder of Build the Matriarchy. And I was raised extremely conservative in a very traditional Christian home. I'm not going to really touch on what my spiritual beliefs are now. That could be a whole other video. But I want to talk about how I moved from my very conservative views of the world, or at least I would say the imposed conservative views that I held, to what I believe now. So first of all, how did my home life happen? What was my home life like? I had a very patriarchal upbringing. My dad was my pastor. He wasn't just my dad. So, and my dad had a very traditional, and my dad was born in 1945, raised by silent generation parents, and he was, at the very tail end of the boomers in 1945. And so socially, very patriarchal, right? The idea that men are typically the leaders of society, that women sort of are secondary to that, and that they sort of exist to serve men and support men in their social and financial goals, whatever they may be. So very typical, right? That's just how the world works. That's just how the world works in their minds, right? And then in a very familial way, he was certainly the patriarch of our family. Dad's word was the final word on anything. Mom and dad were a team, but it definitely felt like dad was the team leader. Do you know what I mean? And then spiritually patriarchal in the sense that he was our pastor too, and the pastor of everyone else I knew in my church. And people naturally looked to him as the spiritual leader of their lives, that they would defer to his teaching, defer to his perspective on theology. And so I grew up with this like threefold or three-tiered or three aspects of patriarchy just like in my face constantly, right? And jokingly, my dad even gave himself a nickname. So my dad's name is actually Richard, but he's always gone by Dick as a nickname since childhood. And so his nickname that I think he came up for himself, came up with for himself, I'm not sure if someone else made it up, but was Most Right Reverend Daddy Dick, which to me was literally the three aspects of the patriarchy. Most Right Reverend, so spiritual patriarchy, Daddy, the familial patriarchy, and just Dick, his name as a man, was the social patriarchy that he was living out. So that was my entire life. And my mom was the, supporting character of my dad's calling, of my dad's plans, my dad's goals for the family, goals for himself, financially, socially, even his employment, whatever, right? My mom was his supporting character. And it wasn't until later in life, like maybe in his 50s, early 50s, that he suddenly had a revelation about women being spiritually equal to men, and that they could even be pastors over men, which was a huge shift in thinking for him. What I realized in myself is that I had always had some trouble with some of the things that we were taught and believe and were told to believe about the differences between men and women, both spiritually and socially. But I just mostly kept that to myself because I didn't like conflict. I still don't really love conflict. And I just found it easier to quietly have those thoughts and feelings and to comply with whatever I was being told. So that's sort of the foundation of my patriarchal brainwashing. I see it as brainwashing, this idea that you just are made to believe that this is the natural order of things, that this is just how life works, right? On top of that, we had the whole conservative, politically conservative element of patriarchy, which was, I don't remember there being, well, there were probably a few times when someone would straight out say that you couldn't be a Christian and a Democrat. But even without saying it, it was certainly implied that conservatism and Christianity equals Republican, right? There's no other option. And a lot of the issues that was reinforced through were being pro-life, pro-straightness, pro-cis, right? So you couldn't believe that abortion was a choice. You couldn't believe that it's okay to be, something other than straight. Anything queer was just absolutely ungodly. And of course, anything trans it wasn't even on the radar in the 80s. I was born in 1977. We didn't talk about being trans at all, back in the 80s and 90s. But it certainly is a identity marker now for conservatives. And then this idea of like my money, my choice, very conservative thinking. And for Christians, a lot of times it's not that they're obsessed with, I want to keep all my money and I don't want the federal government to take my money and I hate taxes, although most people feel like they hate taxes. Even Democrats don't necessarily love taxes, right? Except exorbitant taxes, I would say. But the idea that Christians glom onto a lot of times, conservative Christians, is this idea that I don't want the federal government to overtax me and then use my money to support things that I ideologically disagree with. For example, abortions or, hormone replacement therapy or gender alignment surgeries, whatever, right? Like that stuff is just so wrong in the minds of a very conservative Christian that's why they oppose, nationalized health care. That and also weird things like people just not deserving to get health care coverage for whatever reason. And so I started to look at some of those issues and question how that was Christian, right? How it was Christian to force someone to agree with your political and spiritual views. How is it Christian to tell someone that they're a murderer if they don't want to continue their pregnancy? How is it Christian or Christ-like or following of Jesus to malign or distance or make other someone who isn't like you, right? Who doesn't look like you, act like you, behave like you, whatever. It's like pushing people into this outer realm of not being loved or included. It just didn't feel like Jesus to me, and it didn't make any sense. But again, I quietly thought these things. I didn't really process them out loud very much. So I didn't go marching for pro-life movements, but I knew that I didn't really agree with those perspectives, but I just had to kind of keep that to myself, or else I could be ostracized from my own community, right? So it wasn't until I was an adult and I had more of a choice to attend church or not, right? Like growing up as a pastor's kid, you go to church. It's a requirement. And my parents did make that pretty clear that as long as you're living in our house, you're going to go to church. Or as long as you're under 18, you go. And so it wasn't until I was an adult and I could start to make those choices for myself and I could start to step back a little bit and create some room for critical thinking, because honestly, there just wasn't any encouragement to critically think about these topics, but no mental room for it either. You're just constantly inundated with these particular messages that they wanted to propagate and keep going inside this little bubble, this little community that we had. And also, speaking of that bubble, we really didn't have exposure to other faiths, other cultures, other perspectives. A big part of evangelical Christianity is evangelism, the idea that we have the answer. And so we are going to go out. If we're going to go out into the world, we're going to go and propagate our worldview. We're not going to go sit down and talk to someone else about their worldview. So again, as an adult, I'm getting out of that bubble. I'm starting to have more exposure to different views and people and lifestyles and perspective and experiences and the way they were raised and all that stuff that just completely blew my mind. I didn't know the world was as big as it is because my worldview was so narrow, so small. Also, getting an education. I didn't get my college degree until I was in my 30s. It's not because my parents didn't want me to. My parents wanted me to go to college and were totally fine with me going to a state school. They never were like, you have to go to a Christian college, you know? I chose to go to a Christian college for like 3 semesters after high school, but then I dropped out for totally unrelated reasons that just aren't relevant to the story. But I didn't end up going back to college to get my bachelor's until I was in my 30s. And as I'm in that environment and I'm talking to different people and learning about different schools of thought and different religions and all that stuff, I just started to have this widened view of the world, right? One of the professors that really impressed me at the time, wasn't impressed by him then, but he impressed something on me that I'd never thought before, was a teacher of world religions. And he said that he was like a retired Jesuit priest, and his perspective of the gospel was so much more like expansive than mine. And I'd never heard the perspective that he carried, which again, I'm not going to get into in this video, but it really challenged me. It really it became like a little in my soul and in my mind that I just had to like noodle over and process for so long. And it really opened my eyes to a different perspective on Jesus and on the world. And so all that to say, you know, I think I was raised like a lot of American Christians in that we're sort of taught that the world is just naturally patriarchal and that as a Christian, we should be conservative. And those messages are just constantly reinforced through social interactions, through sermons, through how we step outside of our little bubble and go and help the world and try to get the world to become Christians, and just everything about that conservative Christian world continues to reinforce patriarchy and conservatism. So it wasn't until, you know, I would say I'm 47 now, so I'd say probably in my late 30s that I just started to tiny baby steps tiptoe out into this outside of the bubble world, and I started to look at this stuff more critically. And, you know, in my early 40s, I got more and more into it and more open to the fact that my little tiny narrow worldview, my little sliver of reality, wasn't reality at large, you know? And being willing to hear other people's stories and hear other people's perspectives was so critical to my ability to expand my own mind. And then, you know, an examination and really listening to, honestly, a lot of Black women was like such a huge shift for me, because they have historically had their ear to the ground so much more than white women have, as far as like what's actually coming, what's actually happening, what's the root cause of a lot of this stuff. And so like reading things from Black women, watching YouTube videos, following them on various social media, and just listening and absorbing and processing messages that at first were very challenging for me to hear as a white woman, but have like completely changed me as a person. So, all that to say, you know, after years and years of voting Republican, it was when I think, I would say 2016, when Trump was running, I absolutely detested Donald Trump from day one. There was no way in hell that I was going to vote for him. But I didn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton because I still had these old records playing. Not because she was a woman. I wanted a woman to win. I just didn't like Hillary. I thought she was too liberal. You know, I was still in that mindset of like, you know, I don't know, right? Like, very liberal. I just couldn't see myself doing it. And I think I abstained from voting at all that year. Or wait, No. I voted third party for the first time in my life, which I couldn't believe because I'd always voted Republican in the past, right? I voted for a third party, I think a libertarian, a woman, and then unfortunately Donald Trump won. And then in 2020 was the first time I ever voted for a Democrat. I voted for Joe Biden, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, this is such a huge departure from who I was, right? And then I shouldn't say obviously, but I did vote for Kamala Harris in 2024 and really believed we were going to win. I mean, it just felt like there was such a powerful grassroots movement. I was part of helping her campaign, and I was so excited about where she wanted to go. And from a super leftist perspective, she's quite conservative. She is definitely not a communist, whereas the far right would completely framed her as being like super liberal, but actually she's kind of middle of the road from a lot of people's perspectives. So I just thought, oh my gosh, she's going to win. It's going to be a landslide, But here we are, second term of Trump, and my absolute heartbreak. I mean, I wept for a good couple days after she lost because I just felt like this is a disaster for America. Which I think I was right. But I just felt like I need to do something, right? I can't just feel horrible and go sink into a hole and die. I need to do something. And I didn't just want it to be a political do something. I wanted to get to the heart of what is wrong here, which kind of is reminiscent of what I did for my career for a long time. I was a business analyst, and a big part of what business analysts do is figure out root cause, what's the real problem we're trying to solve here. Let's not put a bunch of band-aids on top of stuff and hope it gets fixed. Like, there's a real disease we have to root out here. And my perspective was patriarchy is the root, is the disease. It is the thing that has led to so much damage. Now, people could say, but we have a society, we got to 2025 and, humans are still on top, and so patriarchy can't be all bad. Well, I could do a whole other video about what has worked and hasn't worked inside of patriarchy. But what has happened from patriarchy is far-reaching, damaging things, like all these social hierarchies that people still believe in, of rich over poor and black or white over black, and spiritual superiority and male and female issues, and just on. And you can watch my whole other video about the reach of patriarchy. But that's why my movement is Build the Matriarchy and not build a progressive America, or let's elect all Democrats, or it's not narrowing in on politics or even America. It's really about this philosophical movement to absolutely dismantle the structures that have created the world that we live in now, and say, what can we build from the ground up that looks entirely different than what we've been experiencing. So that's been the motivation for why I want to build the matriarchy. I know I'm probably not going to see the results of this effort and the fruit of my labor in my lifetime. But if I can be one of millions of contributors to this idea, because I know I'm not alone in this. I know I'm not the first to think this way. I know I'm not, some pioneer in this concept. But if I can play my part and I can help inspire these conversations and these thoughts and these discussions and these feelings, then cool. I get to be a part of that. That's awesome. So that's kind of my journey in a nutshell, how I came from conservatism to where I am today. And I truly believe that matriarchal approaches and concepts are vastly different from patriarchy. I don't think they are identical systems, just with men and women at the helm or something. I truly believe they are meant to be completely different. And I'm working on writing something that sort of fleshes that out in more detail. Not sure exactly where it will go, if it's just some content I'll put on the website. Website, by the way, is buildthematriarchy.com. If you haven't ever gone there, please go visit it. But we'll see. We'll see what comes with that, what comes from that content. But anyway, I hope you join us here. I hope you join the conversation. I hope you are looking at this stuff critically and with an open heart and considering being part of this movement, because I truly think it could change the world.